You'd think after 3 epic movies, a TV show, and a mountain of dragon merchandise, the How to Train Your Dragon saga would be done soaring. But here's the thing, fans still aren't ready to say goodbye. Even though the 3rd movie wrapped things up beautifully, people are holding out hope for a 4th film. And honestly, if it's happening, there's one big condition it has to meet. Dean DeBlois must be involved. Why? Because without him, it just wouldn't feel like the same magical ride. Let's break down why that matters, and why even with the odds stacked against it, a 4th movie might not be so impossible after all. Even though it's pretty unlikely right now, a lot of fans are still holding out hope that How to Train Your Dragon 4 could happen someday. And honestly, if it ever does, there's really only one way it should be made. Dean DeBlois has to be involved. Without him, it just wouldn't feel right. This whole franchise really took off thanks to his vision, so making a 4th film without him could easily backfire no matter how strong the fan demand is. The journey of How to Train Your Dragon began back in 2010 with the release of the first movie. It was loosely inspired by Cressida Cowell's 2003 book, and it introduced audiences to Hiccup, a teenage Viking who was more thoughtful and inventive than the rest of his tribe. Instead of following in their footsteps and becoming a dragon slayer, he ends up bonding with a rare dragon, a night fury he names Toothless. That relationship is what gave the movie its heart, and it's a big reason why the whole thing connected so well with audiences. If you're in the mood for a rewatch, the first film is streaming on Amazon, Hulu, or the Roku channel. The sequel, How to Train Your Dragon 2, is free to watch on Tubi, and The Hidden World, the 3rd one, is also on Hulu. Now, the first film wasn't just a modest hit, it was a major success. It pulled in nearly $500 million at the box office, even though its budget was around $165 million. And on top of that, it got 2 Oscar nominations. So naturally, DreamWorks Animation greenlit 2 sequels. How to Train Your Dragon 2 came out in 2014, and then The Hidden World arrived in 2019. Both sequels built on the story and world in meaningful ways, but by the time the 3rd movie wrapped up, it was pretty clear that this was meant to be the end of the road for Hiccup and Toothless. But, and this is a big but, just because it was meant to be a trilogy doesn't mean a 4th movie is completely off the table. People still talk about it, and DreamWorks hasn't entirely shut the door. The one thing that most fans agree on, though, is that any potential How to Train Your Dragon 4 needs Dean DeBlois at the helm. Why? Because Dean DeBlois wasn't just some hired director who dropped in for a movie or 2. He co-directed the original film with Chris Sanders and co-wrote it with Sanders and Will Davies. But after that, DeBlois took full creative control. He wrote and directed both the 2nd and 3rd films all by himself. That's why the trilogy has such a consistent tone, emotional depth, and strong storytelling. His fingerprints are all over it. So if a 4th film were to move forward without DeBlois, there's a pretty good chance it wouldn't feel like the same story anymore. It might even hurt the reputation the franchise has built over the years. And considering How to Train Your Dragon is considered one of the best fantasy series of the 2010s, that's not a risk worth taking. The tricky part is, DeBlois has said before that he's not really interested in making a 4th movie. Back in 2014, he told Collider that he was committed to telling a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end, basically a trilogy that has integrity and doesn't drag itself out just to make money. He even said he talked Jeffrey Katzenberg, one of the DreamWorks co-founder, out of pushing for a 4th movie. That said, a lot of time has passed and people do change their minds. So who knows? One interesting thing is that despite the original trilogy feeling complete, there's been talk behind the scenes. Composer John Powell once mentioned that Katzenberg brought up the idea of turning the 3rd film into 2 parts. This would have stretched the story further, similar to how big franchises like Harry Potter, Twilight, and The Hunger Games split their final entries into 2 movies. Powell recalled a conversation with DeBlois during a film premiere in Cannes, where they were both surprised by the idea. Powell said that while DeBlois might have more story to tell, they were both under the impression that this was supposed to be a trilogy. The main difference, though, is that unlike those book adaptations, How to Train Your Dragon isn't following a strict source material. The movies are largely DeBlois' original creation, so only he knows if there's enough story left to justify another chapter. Still, considering how much world building has already happened, including multiple seasons of the Dragons TV series and new content coming to Netflix, it wouldn't be surprising if DeBlois had more ideas tucked away somewhere. There's also the fact that early reviews of How to Train Your Dragon 2 mentioned that it had more style than substance. That's not to say it wasn't good, it actually made more money than the first film, pulling in $621.5 million globally. But it raised a fair question. Would spreading the story across more films give it more depth? With how strong the visuals have always been in this franchise, maybe giving the narrative more room to breathe could have made things even better. On top of that, there's something else that changes the equation: the live-action remake. Not only is How to Train Your Dragon getting the live-action treatment, but a sequel to that movie is already on the way. It was confirmed at CinemaCon and is currently scheduled for a June 2027 release. Details about the plot haven't been released yet, but there's speculation that it'll closely follow the storyline of the 2014 animated sequel. That opens the door to some interesting possibilities. If the live-action films perform well at the box office, and considering the popularity of the animated originals, they very well might. DreamWorks could end up expanding the franchise even further. A successful live-action sequel could reinvigorate interest in both versions of the franchise, giving the animation side a reason to explore a fourth film after all. So even though Dean DeBlois seemed pretty firm about ending the story after 3 movies, the circumstances around the franchise are constantly evolving. Fan support hasn't gone away, and now with new projects in the pipeline, the world of How to Train Your Dragon could continue in ways nobody expected. In the end, what fans really want is to return to that world, but only if it feels right. They want a fourth film with the same heart, the same emotional depth, and the same characters they fell in love with. That's only possible if the people who made it special in the first place are involved. Dean DeBlois isn't just a director, he's the storyteller who brought Hiccup and Toothless to life. Without him, there's always the risk that a new installment could feel hollow or disconnected from what came before. But if the stars align, if DeBlois comes back with a story worth telling, and DreamWorks is willing to give it the care and attention it deserves, then How to Train Your Dragon 4 might just work. Until then, fans will keep rewatching the trilogy, speculating about the live-action remakes, and holding out hope for one more flight. Because in a world full of sequels and spin-offs, sometimes the only ones that really matter are the ones made for the right reasons with the right people. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
Save him.